We live in a sunlit world that we perceive to be reality. However, outside the sight of most, there is another shade to our world, one that is every bit as real, though not so brightly lit. That is the nature of our story. It is about one who dares to explore the shadows. It is a tale known as the Unformed King.
My name is Vagrancy. What is to follow is the results of research I have carried out over months. My path started out innocently enough. I was sent to the humble town of Irbai, buried deep in the German Black Forest, to inquire about a supposed collection of artifacts. After traveling by plane, then a bus, and finally having to hike, I half expected to be greeted with groans and glares, but the locals were surprisingly helpful. While sitting in a small tavern, I was told the collection was indeed there, and the town would be happy to see me take it. It had belonged to a disliked man. Some even whispered him to be some manner of warlock, having spent his life gathering profane and grim objects. I asked about who now owned these objects, but he had no family. One of the reasons people feared him was the story that his brother and parents all met violent ends, being mauled by animals in the woods, though no predator was ever captured. The villagers said he had strange and dark powers, most dangerous of which was the ability to speak with abhorrent fiends capable of carrying out such attacks. So, with no rightful owner and none of the villagers wanting supposedly cursed artifacts, I was told I could take them, if I had the nerve to actually grab them. I was promised a local police officer who escorted me to the house early the next morning. I asked if I could be taken there at once, but apparently none, not even a policeman, would be willing to go near the house so close to or after sundown. Rumors of monsters and what they called wicked spirits and all that. I was disappointed, but rented a small room for the night. Sleep was harsh. I had strange half-dreams, thinking I was in my room only to see a shadow drift in from the corner, though it had no features. For some reason, this black, human-sized mass filled me with dread. I was woken by this nightmare several times over that night. When I saw through my window the sky turning more and more blue, an odd sense of relief came over me. At the first bit of sunlight, I was off to meet my escort. He had introduced himself as Werner. I remember when I first saw him, my initial thought was how athletic he looked. Lean and tall, short hair. He looked more like a soldier than a police officer. Thankfully, he was just as eager to get this finished as I was. The man's house was drab, and a strange gloom hung over it. It looked akin to an old hut from a grim fairy tale, almost defiantly different than the other buildings, which all had more typical Scandinavian architecture. Werner and I made our way up to the door, past a small yard choked with weeds, many of which I could not identify. My guide must have noticed my slow glances. He randomly warned me of how, over the years, many animals who had come too close to the yard were found dead around town. It apparently was a local opinion that the odd flowers were poisonous. I asked if anyone ever tried to study or examine the plants, but I was only met with a grumble as the officer said he wouldn't touch one of those plants for all the money in the world. At last we stood before the door. Werner put his hand on the handle of his gun. This seemed strange to me. Why would a man make himself ready to draw a weapon at an abandoned house? I watched as, still resting his hand on his pistol, Werner unlocked the front door and slowly pushed it open. I finally worked the nerve to ask why he grabbed his gun, and he muttered, "Chatty." This explanation only worried me more. What manner of animal would require a trained officer to draw his gun? Inside the building, it was dark and stank of dust. Cobwebs covered several corners, and it seemed that almost no surface was free of the visible signs of age. I asked how long ago the resident had died. Werner told me they found his body only a week ago, though they suspected he had been dead for at least one more week. This was a disgusting thought, as the house looked to have had years of decay. The idea this man lived in such a place made my skin crawl. Werner seemed no less sickened, never taking his hand off his firearm. The building was only one story, and staying close together we searched each room, finding books, drawings of various age. I quickly took note and started putting most readable material into my bags. I only quickly glanced at them. I didn't wish to stay in the house longer than needed, for each room held within it an increasing sense of dread. In a strange way, there was a relief when we came to the last room, some manner of makeshift kitchen. That relief died, however, when I spied a door which could only lead to a basement. I admit, as shameful as it is for a grown man of reason to be so frightened by the idea of going into a mere basement, but I take comfort in the fact that Werner also had reluctance. He asked if I needed to check down there, and believe me when I say I wanted to say no. But I knew if I didn't check down there, then I would live my life wondering. The door was oddly heavy, and it took both of us pushing against it for it to finally give way. Instantly, an invisible cloud of smells rushed past us, an overwhelming earthly scent of long-dead plants. Werner took out his flashlight and shined it down a staircase. Even with the light, we couldn't see the bottom. Just like the rest of the house, there were cobwebs all along the walls. I stepped behind Werner, timidly walking down. Each step seemed to take a year. I noticed that there seemed to be far less dust down here than the rest of the building. When we finally reached the basement itself, I could not believe what I was seeing. The basement seemed almost the same size as the rest of the house, possibly even bigger. There were smaller sections, walled off, creating more rooms to explore. I normally would have been happy with such a development, but in such a building like this, it was frightening to think how much longer I'd have to be there. Looking back, I believe the building was more fearsome in my mind than it was really. It was just a normal house. There were no ghouls or wraiths lurking in its rooms or halls, and yet, somehow every corner seemed terrifying. Every shadow housed faceless nightmares. Even where there was nothing, I felt fear. It was like the whole property was smothered by some unseen cloud of negative emotion, and deep in that basement, this unreasonable fear was only stronger. I caught myself holding my breath when I looked around each corner. The rooms were filled with jars and bottles, metal tins and baggies. They were all filled with dry herbs or roots. A few had odd elixirs inside. I was not brave enough to sample any. I did put some jars in my pack and asked Werner if he was going to take any, but he only responded with a harsh stare. I can't blame him. Even now, there is a part of me that would have been happy to have no connection of any sort with that place. With my pack now full, I was about to suggest we leave, but something was caught in Werner's light. Something slightly reflective, like a wet surface. We both saw it. I knew because my companion and I both glanced at each other in a vain hope the other had not noticed. For some reason that I cannot fully explain, there was a greater fear at this point. I could feel an unreasonable pounding in my chest, and my breathing became harsh and quick. We timidly moved towards the back wall. where we had seen the light reflect, and discovered the wall itself was coated in some unidentifiable black fluid, looking like oil but lacking its texture or thickness. The vile stuff had been spread over the wall to form what I could only describe as some sort of sun icon, a large circle with odd bend lines going outward from it. I have come to hate that strange sign, not because of its meaning, for I do not still fully understand that. Instead, the reason that just thinking of it upsets me so is the unspeakable power it held. Just looking at it gave me a rise to such an unreasonable fear that at once both Werner and I turned and ran, racing up the stairs out of the building entirely. We did not say a word again after that. I left with my findings at once, and Werner, if by shame for his fright or confusion, would not so much as meet my eyes. I still wonder about that officer. Does he jump at shadows like I do now? There has always been a part of me that wanted to try and reach out, to follow up with him. I haven't, of course. It would be far too intrusive. I only hope that he didn't have the dreams like I did. As soon as the plane on the way back to Amistad, my dreams became more odd and often frightening. They were dark and frantic visions. The first few took place in locations I had known in my childhood, such as a store or on the street. Now that I have hindsight, I think these dreams were the worst, not because of horrible images, but more because I understand now. These were a ploy to use my own memories against me. The oldest dream I can clearly recall was set at night outside an old thrift store a few blocks from the house I grew up in. In the dream, some of the children I went to school with and I were going to break into the store. This was very strange because neither I nor the friends I had back then were the sort to do such a thing. Yet, with no understanding of why it was happening, I followed them. We broke our way in through a window, only to trigger some sort of alarm. It bellowed with a discordant, shrill sound I did not recognize. We all turned and fled, but as I ran, I happened to catch movement out of the corner of my eye. I saw it then, that black, vile substance. It was seeping, more slithering, really, into a manhole cover. I was startled awake as soon as I looked at it, with a panicked pain in my chest. I honestly thought I was having a heart attack. I kept myself at work and invested in sleep aids after that. However, I only ever took 2 of the pills. The night I tried using them, I was again assaulted with a profound dream. I found myself in a parking lot, alone, with no sound or signs of life. The sky was covered with gloomy gray clouds. I recognized it to be the lot where the monthly swap meet was held. I enjoyed it when I was a child, but now it felt almost like a mockery of my old happiness. The stillness was suddenly broken by the sound of a car engine starting up. I turned around and saw an old truck on the far side of the lot. It slowly started to move. I could see there was no person inside. Watching it drive by itself, I felt a strange pull. Something in my mind, maybe some instinct given to me by a long-forgotten ancestor, or it could have been simply my own sanity, told me not to allow that machine to get close to me. I ducked behind a light post and a trash can. I could feel a sort of frustration from that truck. I moved closer to the exit of the lot, but found that each step I took, I was becoming more and more labored. The asphalt under my feet was becoming sticky like tar. I looked down and saw that black ooze had once again appeared. I struggled to pull a foot out and place it in front of me. I could feel the breath becoming more and more strained. Then the liquid suddenly moved under my feet, pulling itself to the center of the parking lot. I looked back in the direction. It was moving and screamed at the sight of a giant shape starting to rise from the blackness. Worse yet, I realized it was the blackness itself rising up, not some creature from therein. The scream not only woke me, but also people who lived in the apartment underneath mine. I never in my life thought I would be happy to hear them hitting their ceiling with a broom or something like that. All the while cursing me, even if it was vulgar. At least it was some kind of proof the real world was once again around me. That the light of reason and reality had chased away the madness my mind was creating. After that, I stopped taking the pills. I didn't want to risk that it could strengthen the effects of the dreams. I did start to experiment with the dreams, actually, later. I found sleeping in the day did weaken them. Sometimes I was even able to sleep soundly, with the daylight shining. The dreams at night, however, became more unreasonable. I even found myself questioning them sometimes. My actions in the dreams didn't match with how I would do things in the waking world. The locations in the dreams also became less and less familiar. Some even seemed like they couldn't be Earth. I saw weird landscapes, grass and trees that were all the wrong colors, clouds that giggled or screamed, while rivers slithered across the ground. The sky rippled like water and flickered in different colors, and ever present were the beating of drums and shoutings of guttural voices. This place was lit like the daytime, but I could see no sun or moon. The dreams in this world became longer and longer. I started to fear that I was becoming more and more occupant of this dream state than I was the waking world, with nothing else to do. I dared to explore it. I wandered randomly at first, but slowly I worked up the nerve to try and locate the voices. In most of the dreams, they became more clear. They were not speaking any language I knew, but I could make out a consistent speech. When I did finally see the source, I wish I had not. I found them dancing among a great roaring fire, strange and dreadful shapes, like animals, or rather like things that were clearly not human, though most walked and danced like humans. I do not believe I could describe them all, regardless of how long I had. Some had fur, others had scales. More than a couple of them even lacked skin. Their heads were adorned with horns or fins. Some had hair, but it was wild and knotted. They threw clumps of dirt and grass while others screamed at the ground. I foolishly thought there could never be more untamed or clearly mad a sight. Suddenly, as if my very thought had summoned it, I heard a cry of a horse. I looked to the direction the sound had come from and saw what could only be called a mangled mass of shadow and gore, a hulking pile of horse parts bound in chains, dragging a huge stone structure that looked like it could be some kind of gigantic throne. All draped over the throne was that horrible blackness. I screamed, drawing the strange creature's attention to me. At the time, I did not care. I was moved by some primal part of my mind. In my head, I knew I had only one chance to flee or attempt to slay that horrific slime. I chose to run. Even as I heard a thunderous voice screech my name, my heart pounded in my chest as I realized that whatever was calling me knew my name. It could identify me. I screamed, partly from fright, but also because I wanted to not hear my name being called. I wanted to deny what I had seen and heard. I wanted to deny what had ever gone on in that damned house, that I had ever laid eyes upon the sign or that black ooze that was drawn with. I wanted to wake up so the dawn could chase away the nightmares once again. No matter what I wanted, though, I could tell those creatures were closing in. The massive pile of gore was bringing that throne ever closer. Exhaustion started to drag me down, till at last I fell. Timidly, I rolled over onto my back and looked up, but where I expected to see the swarm of horrors bearing down upon me, I saw only the open sky. I sat up and saw the creatures were all some yards away, along with that mountain of horse parts and the giant stone seat. The black substance started to rise once again, pulling itself up to a new shape. The beastly fiends all screamed and shouted a clear name, Prince Razoth. I sat on the ground, my jaw hanging wide open as the shape became more and more defined. Even now I can only piece the form together vaguely, like some titanic beast, a mix of wolf and bat and man, though altogether wrong, mocking these aspects as it looked down upon me with its head tilted to the side. I understood at once. The thing, this Razoth, was confused by me. Fair enough, I suppose. To such a strange and frightening creature, I imagine a normal, sane-looking being would be very perplexing. It leaned towards me, and with a voice comparable only to shattering glass, it spoke my name one more time. The voice jarred me awake at last, and I threw myself out of the bed suddenly. Though dazed slightly, I was happy to be back in reality. I have since devoted my every waking moment to studying this creature. Though I have had to reach out to less and less pleasant people to gather information, I believe now I have a clear image. This thing calls itself Prince Razoth, though only when it should want such things. Many religions have attempted to explain it. I have found an uncomfortable similarity to it and various pagan gods. Those who worshipped him, at least in his true name, call him the Unformed King. I have found more and more signs of his corruption in this world. Subtle clues and hints in the behavior of people and even animals. My dreams have become more and more bearable, even peaceful sometimes. I believe this is because, simply put, I am now boring to him. Maybe that's the most dreadful part of it all. For all the unreasonable fear he instills, the worst of all is that there is no greater will or scheme. The terror visited upon me was nothing more than the passing glance of a thing my mind could not decipher. Far greater things are in his sights, much more than I could fully understand, and yet I am grateful for this reprieve. I understand, maybe too late now. There are some things the human mind was not meant to learn. Some things defy explanation, and some things are better left outside the sight of man.
Donat itorum convenient.